NASCAR just held their end of the year State of the Sport address with Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell. Let's break down the main talking points of that event and what that means for the sport in the future. Before the racing kicks off in Phoenix, let's talk about the future of the sport. Steve Phelps, Steve O'Donnell sat down at Phoenix Raceway with the media to talk about what things are looking like in the future, from TV rights to the playoff format to Auto Club and more things in between. So let's get right into it, talking about this playoff format and what Steve Phelps had to say about it. Phelps compliments the playoff system that we have right now in terms of its toughness. And if you look at other motorsports across the world, can they also say that they race at dirt tracks, road courses, street courses, concrete, asphalt tracks, all in one season? And that most likely is a no. He shares that they think that they have one of the best racing series in the world and one of the most competitive series in the world. And he also has a message to those who think that the playoff system is gimmicky. He says, quote, "I've heard some things. There were people like, hey, listen, this is gimmicky." It's not. It's an incredible, incredible playoff system that rewards the best drivers in our sport. So between the variety of tracks that NASCAR goes to the competitiveness of the playoff format, it is standing out amongst the rest in the world, I believe, in terms of motorsports. I mean, we look at Formula One right now, of course, one of the pinnacles of motorsports, right? But then you see Max Verstappen. He's winning week after week after week, and fans are turning off to that dominance. And of course, I do believe Formula One has compelling personalities. It is really a showing of mechanical, just engineering, what these teams can do, what they can build. Sometimes that overtakes the competition between the drivers. It's what machines are better than the others versus which drivers are better than the others. So that's how I kind of compare Formula One and NASCAR at this time. And that's kind of how I've always compared it. But I think the system that NASCAR has created is very compelling. I'm not saying it's not frustrating, but it's compelling, and it creates this competitive atmosphere that leaves fans on the edge of your seats, whether you think it's gimmicky or not. So in that case, I think NASCAR has been successful. In terms of attendance, which goes right into our TV viewership numbers, which Steve Phelps did address, he did start off by saying that 50% more of the tracks have sold out this year in terms of ticket sales as opposed to last year. So for everyone saying NASCAR is dead, take a look at the butts in the seats. It's better than it was last year, and I can attest to that from the tracks I went to last year to this year. Things are looking great, and I would commend NASCAR on doing a great job telling stories, selling the stories at the track, especially highlighting big moments at the racetracks and with this Gen 7 car and how it's elevated the racing at mile and a half specifically. I think that's prompted fans to go to certain tracks, especially Kansas, like because of this Gen 7 car and how it's performed and the hype that the booth has amplified with how this car races and these drivers being excited about it. I now want to go to Kansas. I would have never wanted to go to Kansas Speedway before until now. So I think it's a testament to how NASCAR has promoted this Gen 7 car, the promotion of the 75th year of NASCAR and that celebration, plus the fans rewards program that NASCAR has now promotes fans to get more engaged in the sport, and they can use their points to get tickets to certain races. So I think altogether NASCAR has done a great job trying to get more folks to the track. Now, in terms of the TV numbers, where Steve Phelps admits things are a little up and down at the start of the season, and he says that weather was a big factor in this. We saw ratings dip in the negative double digits as opposed to being in the positive. Now that we're at the end of the season, or I guess one race to go, the ratings are now like more minus in the mid single digits. So we got better, but it's in terms, I guess the question is, how do we get the ratings better TV wise? And a lot of that has to come down to the new TV deal, and we'll get into that in a second. And a lot of it has to do with maybe it's how do we have more of an incentive to watch on TV? And a lot of right now during the season, we're competing with the NFL, the NHL, other sports, and that's not new to NASCAR. But it does kind of make you question, is there a shift in what the audience is willing to see? I know everyone's like, well, Chase Elliott not being in the playoffs is a big factor. I don't know how big of a factor that is, but Chase Elliott single-handedly is not the reason why TV numbers have dipped this season. I can guarantee that. But the next TV deal is going to be incredibly important, and it looks like it's going to be kind of a three-tiered approach between broadcast, cable, and streaming. And I think the future of all watching of anything is going towards streaming. So I think that's going to be big in NASCAR's future to capitalize that, as well as holding on to the broadcast rights for now for broadcast and cable, because that's where the old audience, I guess the core audience, really gets that viewership in. So you're gonna have to straddle between your old audience and your new audience as you try to propel the sport forward. Phelps also shares that, they kind of are hoping to have something figured out a little sooner. I know that I think at some point we were expecting this summer things would have been solidified with the NASCAR Cup Series. Of course, the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the CW have a deal together, but for Cup, we've kind of been left hanging for a little bit. The positive is that it exceeded their expectations with how many folks were interested in NASCAR media rights. So hopefully that is a positive sign of things to come. We also know that this new TV deal is so essential for the teams in terms of revenue splitting, and that goes into the charter conversation because that is another contention point for these negotiations between NASCAR and the teams and the tracks. This is a talking point that Steve O'Donnell nor Steve Phelps went into a lot of detail about because there's not a lot that they can share, but they are working on an extension for the charter system. There's no idea of the timing of when this extension is going to be done, but Steve Phelps did say that he would like to have the TV or I guess media rights figured out first before they can go into deeper discussions or at least finalize what charter discussions they are having. I wish I had more to update you on there between the TV rights and the charter conversation, but that's all I have for now. Let's now switch to the on-track product, what we're actually seeing with this Gen 7 car. And the main talking point with this Gen 7 car is that short track and road course package and what this is going to look like in the future because clearly it has not been up to our liking. So today when I'm recording this Friday, November 3rd, which is wild for me to say, the drivers and Goodyear are going to be meeting to talk about that tire that they've been using at the short track, specifically with Martinsville, trying to figure out how to make it better to make a better product at these short tracks. And Steve O'Donnell shared that they are going to be working on this during the off season. Short-term, Steve O'Donnell says that they're going to be looking at shifting, trying to fix shifting at the short tracks, and they're going to be looking at the underbody aero package. When they tested at Richmond, they seemed to hit on something that was pretty promising when they changed the underbody aero package that they had. So we're going to be focusing on that short-term as well as the shifting. But long-term, the question also is horsepower. This is something I talk about on the show quite often. This is something that the fans talk about, wanting more of it and why we're not seeing that. Bob Pockress was the one that posed this question and Steve O'Donnell responded. He said, quote, "I think everything is up for consideration. We've proven that. You have to factor in what are the costs involved as well, right? It's not as simple as just upping the horsepower. You better be ready for all your OEs to be on board. It better make sense for any potential new OEM and technology. It's not just a short-term answer." Don't worry, we're going to get to the conversation about new OEMs in a few minutes, but I want to continue this conversation of the short track, specifically talking about Auto Club, because pictures circulated on social media this week of demolition beginning at that track, which breaks my heart, but we have to move into the future regardless. Steve Phelps did confirm that this is the case. They have begun demolition. In terms of what this demolition looks like, what the rebuild looks like, he did say that they are planning on making this most likely a half-mile track, so a short track. They have renders done. They have plans to move forward. However, Phelps did share this is kind of a rough time to be building with inflation and the economy and everything like that. In terms of, is this going to be back on the schedule in 2025? They're not willing to comment farther on it, which I don't blame them. I think this track is not going to be back on the schedule in 2025 with how things are shaking out, but that's my personal opinion. So that's the update on Auto Club. That's all I have for you right now there. But if we want to talk about road courses, the other side of this Gen 7 kind of issue package-wise, we did talk about stage breaks. Are they going to be returning in 2024? Are they staying away? What does that look like? Steve O'Donnell said that they are 99% sure that stage breaks, or stage cautions, I should say, will be back at road courses next season. He also shares that they might take a look at how the points are given out during the road course events, if they're going to change some strategy there. So we might see some things that are different coming up in 2024 with how the road courses are handled points-wise, playoff system-wise. So we'll keep an eye on that as we go forward. Sticking with the track conversation, if we're going to kind of just flow into this next topic the right way, talking about international tracks, what that looks like for NASCAR in the future. Of course, it was rumored that Montreal might be on the schedule for 2024. Of course, that deal seemed to fall through. Steve O'Donnell did clear up the rumors that the Iowa Speedway deal was not to replace Montreal. At one time, they wanted Montreal and Iowa to both be on the schedule, but it seemed to be a little too soon to push that Montreal deal, but lucky to have Iowa on the schedule. I'm very excited to have that back. I know the Xfinity Series races there were bangers, so I'm very excited for this. Of course, ARCA races there are also fantastic. So that was all the on-track action. I want to focus to off-track, talking about the personalities in the sport. Kelly Crandall actually asked a really interesting question, talking about how NASCAR overcomes certain situations like we're seeing with this Championship 4. She talked to Ryan Blaney. He said, "It's unfortunate for us that there is no drama, there's no excitement." Dale Jr. said that there's no bad blood between these Championship 4. So how does NASCAR kind of deal with a situation situation where maybe this championship 4 isn't as compelling as in years past? How do we handle that and bring excitement to the fans? As for the on-track ways to deal with this, I think Steve O'Donnell had a great response to this. He said, quote, "We're not going to be a soap opera. We're a sport that's going to go out there and race and showcase the talent of our athletes. With that will come personality. With that will come some storytelling. We've got to do a better job, certainly around storytelling." And with that, I agree. And that brings us to looking at this issue from an off-track perspective. So what is NASCAR doing off-track? What are these drivers and teams doing off-track to kind of build these more exciting narratives? And Steve Phelps talked about the new production building that's going to be next to the R&D Center, dealing with the live broadcast and also content creation, or NASCAR Studios as he called it. And utilizing that NASCAR Studios is going to be big, bringing fans more short form content, getting these drivers more out there. What they're doing this year, I think, has been great with like Alex Weaver, for example. And even like all the folks at NASCAR social teams, I think, have stepped up their game this year. And I think having this just facility specific to content, broadcast, media production is going to be a big step in the right direction. Steve Phelps also talked about how this is not just an effort on the drivers or the teams. This has to be a group effort to grow these personalities and grow the sport, grow the star power. It's an effort between NASCAR, the tracks, the drivers, the teams. Everybody has to come together or this will not work. It's important for drivers to continue building their own brands, is what Steve Phelps shared. It's also important for these teams to continue building their own brands. They're on board with that. They want these teams and drivers to do that because as they build their own brands, they bring in more fans to those teams, those drivers. In turn, they bring more fans to the sport. So all in all, they have to work together for this to be successful. All this encompassing, it is so important to optimize your digital presence in terms of marketing, just branding, etc. That's super important, but I think that we've gotten away, just my personal opinion, we've gotten away from more of the at-track side of things. I would love to see more at-track activations, and I think that'll help these younger fans, newer fans, and even the older fans continue to have that relationship with these drivers moving forward. So that's something I would personally like to see. They talked about that a little bit again in this press conference, but just a little opinion to sprinkle in there in terms of how we can help amplify star power at the track and also online. That leads into the final talking point of star power, talking about these younger drivers going into the sport, because statistically, the ages of these drivers in ARCA Truck Xfinity Cup, they're getting younger. And with that means you have your veterans leaving the sport. Kevin Harvick, for instance, his last races this weekend at Phoenix in the Cup Series full-time, which is wild to think about. We had Kurt Busch that had to retire from full-time racing. You talk about in recent years, Jeff Gordon, Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, like all these big drivers, throw in, I guess, Clint Boyer there too. They had a strong fan base. Where are their fans going? Have they left the sport completely now that their driver's gone? Because a lot of these drivers too were tied to Dale Earnhardt, which is where a lot of the older fans gravitate towards. Do we have young drivers that are compelling enough, have good stories, are relatable enough, are out there enough for these floundering fans or even newer fans to gravitate towards? And that's why these young drivers are so important. Steve O'Donnell said, quote, "I think we have a big opportunity as a sport because we have a crop of young drivers for fans to come in and embrace. Now we have to do the job, as do they, to say, hey, come root for me, come along for the ride. It's a lot of young drivers that we need to have fans embrace and latch onto and show them why." And that's the big thing, is showing them why. And this is why we have the conversation of, are these drivers in here because they paid for it, or are they in here on their own merit? For example, the whole Josh Berry signing to the number 4, they're taking a leap of faith because, again, sponsorship is not really guaranteed for Berry right now. They're losing Anheuser-Busch. I'm going to be losing Smithfield. Kind of taking a risk here with Josh Berry, but his talent has spoken for itself. He has come through the ranks, I think, the right way, the talent-based way. And then we have some drivers that are from money, and it's like, how do I relate to this? And in that way, you're having to really make sure your driver is relatable, marketing them the right way. And that's where you can utilize social media. And that's also the tricky part too. If you're not relatable at all, you're not going to get fans. So it's an interesting spot in the sport that we're at now, where we have these new drivers coming in. The narratives is, oh, did you pay your way to the top, or did you race in on merit and talent? Sometimes those go hand in hand. It's very interesting. I'll stop rambling though. Star power in the sport though is a major conversation, a major talking point that continues to go on. I am curious to see how NASCAR, how these teams, how these drivers continue to handle it into the future. But it is a talking point that will not cease to exist. It's going to continue on and on. The final part of this that we got to discuss is the future of these cars in NASCAR, talking about EV. I remember, I think last season or something like that, we had a discussion as to, when is NASCAR going to go the hybrid route? When is NASCAR going to look at different alternatives to racing, maybe greener, a little cleaner? And we have a little bit of an answer, but kind of not. Steve O'Donnell said, quote, yeah, a lot of work's gone on at the R&D department around EV. We have a car. We have an alternative body style with that car. I would not look for us specifically to go racing with it. I think you could see it showcased at certain events next year, but there's other forms that we want to look at. For instance, he shared that next Thursday, they're going to be going to Japan to look at hydrogen racing. So looking at different forms of energy to implement with an EV styled car. And when we look at the future, we also have the conversation of, okay, so Toyota, Chevy, Ford, are we going to be looking at EV for them? And what does that mean for other manufacturers wanting to join NASCAR? And this kind of actually opens the discussion up a little broader to have a new OEM enter the sport. They shared that there is certainly an interest of somebody new joining NASCAR, and the Garage 56 car was the goal of that, was to kind of expand that interest, keep that interest going. Steve O'Donnell shared that the challenge, though, is what engine package are they going to run specifically in Cup. He shared the good news is that all existing OEs are open to conversations and open to dialogues as to where new technology is going, and that openness to certain conversations has allowed new OEMs to kind of get in the mix of what their participation in NASCAR might look like. So it's very interesting. I know all y'all in the comments are going to put your theories as to who you think could join NASCAR next. There's no timeline for any of this. A lot of it seems very exploratory right now, which I'm totally fine with. But that's your update there on kind of where the sport is heading and what things might look like in the future. I know that there was a lot of information in there, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to check out TobyChristie.com and AboveTheYellowLine.com for your NASCAR news, also your championship weekend recaps. You can also find more up-to-date news on our social media pages, and make sure you join us for our Thursday night live stream where we'll share our top moments of the season and recap the entire championship weekend. It's going to be a fun show that we would love to have your input on, so make sure to join us in the comments live Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But that is it for me. Enjoy the championship weekend, and until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.